Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry. And of course, this is my co-host.
You sounded like you weren't so sure there for a second.
I don't always know everything about...
I'm Chris Huddleston.
Today, we're both very excited to be talking to you about, I don't know when it was, but it's part of the Alien franchise, Alien 3, or if you read it technically, Alien Cubed.
That's true, yeah.
Here, in a world where the sun burns cold and the wind blows colder, a visitor has come. But not by herself.
It started.
The suspense is back.
And we have no weapons of any kind?
The fear is back.
Ah! Don't look back, dude! Run as fast as you can!
And most of all, the bitch is back. Alien 3.
Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. It's IMDb's synopsis. Returning from LV 426, Ellen Ripley crash lands on the maximum security prison Fiorina 161, where she discovers that she has unwittingly brought along an unwelcome visitor. That's kind of a clunky,
yes,
with the numbers in there and everything. So it's a David Fincher movie. Sigourney Weaver, Charles Dutton, and then a bunch of British people from 1992.
A bunch of British people that I think audience today would recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And that have gone on to do some other high-profile stuff that that's the guy from, he was in, you know what I mean? So I think it's interesting now to rewatch this movie and see the talent that has gone on to do some even higher profile stuff since then. But it does feel like it was shot in the UK on the sound stages there, and they just cast a bunch of local. I mean, I don't mean to sound disparaging. They do a good job. They're talented actors, but at the time this was made, they were unknowns for the most part.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. I'm saying this authoritatively as though I know. I don't really know that much about this movie. But, so Alien, this is the third installment of the Alien franchise, of course. Alien, Ridley Scott film, is a modern science fiction classic.
Mm-hmm.
That was 79?
79, I think, yeah.
And then the sequel to that, Aliens, was a help me out. I had a
James Cameron.
Yeah, James Cameron. James Cameron.
He's done
film.
some a lot of indie films here and there.
Yeah, you may not have heard.
I mean,
indie filmmaker James Cameron.
He's not a household, but he's not that well known.
But speaking of which, I'm getting off track here, but before we finish, I want to talk about Avatar: The Way of Water, which is now on HBO Max, or just Max. I don't know what's going on with that. And I started watching a little bit of it, and I'd love to
Sure.
chat about that a tiny bit. It's a long movie, and I'm only about 20 minutes into it.
I've not seen it.
Well, you should take a peek. I mean, I don't have the full 3D rig, of course, and I think that's probably the biggest selling point of it.
Yeah.
But
I feel like I kind of missed out by not seeing it in the theater. I feel like it. We'll get to it, but I feel like it probably loses a lot at home.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, I didn't leap out of my chair and run to go see it. So what's that about? I don't know. Anyway, Alien 3 felt to me. I'm sorry, I just grabbed the wheel. Why don't you go? I have seen this, but it's been a long time.
Oh, I choked myself. Sorry, I went down the wrong hole.
Don't do that. You start.
You go ahead.
No, I'm always talking about everything.
No, you go. That hurt.
You're injured. All right, I will
I'm
do that.
injuring myself.
Alien is a sci-fi classic. I think Aliens is also a sci-fi classic, and the brilliant thing about it as a sequel, handing it to James Cameron, he made it an action movie. So I think that Alien is a good old monster in the dark, afraid of the dark horror movie set in space. And Aliens is a sci-fi action shoot 'em up. Sure, it's scary, and sure, the monsters are horrific, but it's in the sense of the shape of it, I feel like it's a little closer to like can't remember anything. What was the one about the bugs? It's the jingoistic thing when they battle.
Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers. It's more about, space soldiers versus the alien horde.
Do you think? Let me stop you there for one second, because I don't want to get away from that. A couple of things in there. One, so I've always preferred Alien to Aliens. I mean, I'm not saying Aliens is bad, but one, can you think of any other franchise where, like, the first movie was directed by a top-notch director, and then the second movie was directed by a top-notch director? And then also Starship Troopers is one that would be interesting to do sometime, because that's a movie that it's a satire, but a lot of people didn't get that it was a satire. It was like, cool, let's kill stuff. And was Aliens... is there a jingoistic aspect to that, like Starship Troopers, or was that meant to not be in any way satirical? I don't know the answer to that question, but
I personally, my opinion would be that it's not, that it differs in that way. That Starship Troopers. Yes, I can't unsay it. Was so overtly political and satirical that I feel like the kind of gross factor of that was, in some ways, I interpret it as the filmmaker's outrage at the political commentary he was making, that he was literally ripping people apart. It was really gross.
And similarly, RoboCop from Verhoeven also, yes, also a satire.
I think that's part of the filmmaker's thing. But the violence is there's I sense, this is all my opinion, I feel that there's an undercurrent of like, oh, this is what you want. This is, are you not entertained? Here, look, his head explodes. Are you happy now? There's almost an outrage to it. I think James Cameron does dabble with political statements in his filmmaking. I think they're much more subtle. I think they're baked into the stories he chooses to tell. And first and foremost, he tries to make an entertaining film. And I want to drop another pin in Avatar, because that's what he's been doing for the past 3,000 years. And I'm finally getting a look at it, and I have feelings about it. I can't think of another. I don't know that my movie knowledge has the depth and breadth to like really answer that question, but I think the studios were smart in taking a sequel of such a unique property. I mean, you can't really just continue that story as is. You have to do something new with it, and I think the studios were smart enough to say, why don't we give it to somebody really good and let him off the leash a little in terms of, how would you make this interesting for yourself? And like having, I mean, we haven't seen it yet. It's not out yet, but like having James Mangold pick up Indiana Jones, I think that just feels like, it's not that he's incapable of making a bad movie. He could, but I think it's such a smart choice. To say, who can we trust? They're not going to give it to somebody they don't trust. But who can we trust to be true to all the things it needs to be, but also breathe some fresh life into it? And I think James Mangold is a director that has proven again and again that he can make successful, exciting, well-received, entertaining movies and hit all those marks. So I have high hopes for this new Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
I'm just digressing all over the place. Anyway, so I don't know the story between 2 and 3. I think the success of the first 2 films pretty much dictated that they were going to make another film. And in some ways, this film, Alien 3, conforms to a pattern that we just discussed in Indiana Jones, which was you kind of go back to a lot of the elements of the original thing, where it's a single alien instead of a horde of aliens. It's it's picking them off one at a time. They're in an isolated place, and there's the sort of it does carry on some of the themes from the second one. The theme of motherhood comes up that we introduce when Ripley meets a little girl in the second one. So they carry on that sort of theme of motherhood in some messed up ways. I mean, I think it's hammy at by the way, we spoil all these. So if you haven't seen Alien 3 yet, sorry. But when the alien bursts out of her and she cradles it like a newborn, I thought that was pretty messed up. In general, I think this is the weakest of the first 3.
Sure.
For a number of technical reasons, but it has moments that I thought, well, that's kind of inspired, And that moment, as sort of shoehorned in as it was, felt kind of, balls out in a way that I thought, that's memorable. I'll remember that one. It feels like they were ending the series, right? Ripley dies.
Yeah, it seemed like they were trying to.
All the people that sort of escaped from the second one die. I think that she is the most interesting thing in this film. Like, Sigourney Weaver is just compelling on screen. She does her job. She shows up. She's made choices. There's stuff going on behind her eyes. Like, there's a scene in which, so she's pretty coy. She resists telling them why she wants to do an autopsy of the kid and why she's sniffing around, right? And why she's so clearly concerned. In a way that I thought was a little unbelievable. I mean, I thought, they wouldn't necessarily use violence on her, but you would pin this person down and be like, what? Right? Mm-hmm. What is it? What you're clearly concerned about something. You've said contagion, right? We need some answers right now. And everybody's very polite about it. They're like, oh, well, I guess she'll tell us when she feels like she's... No, come on. There's a scene in which... the doctor is describing what they found. A person ends up dead, and he's like, there was a mark, and there's sort of a 3/4 profile shot of her, and he says there was a weird mark in the tube, and she looks up, and then he talks about it. It looks almost like a acid burn or something like you saw on the ship, and she looks up a second time directly at him, and it's just beautiful little bit of non-verbal acting that Sigourney Weaver is doing that is compelling, and you can say, well, that's a very simple moment, but it's gripping. It had me riveted. I think if she hadn't been in this movie wouldn't have flown at all.
Yeah.
And I think you sit through it because she is so compelling. There's echoes of, and I know I'm just steamrolling ahead, so jump in here if anything I say resonates. But there's echoes of The Thing, right? The Thing, The Thing sort of gets a dog is the first host, and so this was confusing. In the opening sequence, we have some shots that look like the face hugger is on a human, and we find out later that it's on Ripley somehow, but her space thing isn't compromised. Mm-hmm. So you think, well, how? Right?
Yeah, I don't know.
And then there's a living face hugger still in the thing, but they die after they impregnate a thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we see it attack the dog that somebody inexplicably has on this penal colony out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Which I thought was sort of reminiscent of
That
The
was definitely
Thing.
echoed The Thing.
Yeah. And so and the alien effect is a guy in a suit, which feels distinctly low rent compared to it moves differently, and she makes a comment about it. Well, this one's different. I haven't seen one like this before. Right, that we find out more about in subsequent Alien franchise films, Covenant, that they take sort of different shapes based on the host. But I don't think that is something that we have dipped into prior to this chronologically, which I thought was kind of interesting. It doesn't get into the xenomorphs. They don't talk about it. It's just a monster. It's just killing people. I think the convicts are singularly uninteresting. They're all rapists and murderers, but none of them seem particularly threatening. I mean, Ripley has so much gravitas. Like, she has seen it all, and she has beaten alien monsters. These guys do not scare her.
There's one scene where
there is one scene where they're going to
grab
rape
her, and then Charles S. Dutton they're all kind of scared of him, and he comes in and starts beating on them, and then they back off, and then that's kind of it for her being in kind of danger from them.
That's a scene that I feel like if you're gonna do it in this reality, you have to have that scene. She's gonna get attacked. They say, oh, it's a penal colony full of YY chromosomes, right? So like uber alpha males, like crazy genetic anomalies that have 2 Y chromosomes, and they're crazy roid rage monster men. And she's the first woman any of them have seen in decades. So you're going to have that scene. And I thought that scene was done, it was scary. It was a scary scene. But she still didn't seem scared walking around among them. And I think that was the right choice for her as an actor. I think as a director, you'd need to try and weight I feel like the audience needed to feel for the most part, those convicts didn't feel like they were much of a threat to Ripley, really. I don't know. That was my take on it. Anyway, I've been talking forever. You talk for a while.
So this was the only film in the franchise, and that includes Prometheus that we've talked about before, that that we both liked, and
Did
then
we do
also
Prometheus?
we didn't actually specifically
done it.
review it, but we've talked about it here and there, in episodes. And also I guess in the franchise you have to count the Aliens versus Predator movies, which those are hot garbage, but
I guess.
But
do you really though? Just because there's
I don't
aliens
know.
in them? I mean,
I don't know if it counts. I don't know if it counts or not. But anyway, I've seen everything except this is the only one that I had not seen. And my kind of understanding was that it flopped, but I went and looked at the box office numbers, and it's kind of interesting when you look. Each film made more than the last one did.
Yeah.
So this one made more than the second one, and made more than the first one, and then the next one, the whatever it is, Resurrection or whatever, it made even more than this third one. So not a ton more, but so I thought that was kind of interesting because, like I say, I always thought, because no one seems to like this one very much, and that's kind of why I stayed away from it.
Did you?
Did I like it?
Yeah.
Well, I'll get to that here in a minute.
All right. Get to it.
But it has we talk about, the 2 directors, and at the time it wouldn't have really been known that David Fincher would go on to be as good a director as he is. And for me, Seven and Fight Club and The Game are all 3 of the best movies of the 90s. I love all of those movies. So, he went on to be a really, really great director. But before this, he'd done a ton of big music videos for Madonna and George Michael and, a bunch of people. But with this one, and my understanding is this movie was sort of taken away from him, that there was a lot of he's been pretty outspoken about that he was not happy about this. This wasn't an enjoyable experience for him. And I think like almost to the point of he was ready to quit filmmaking,
Wow.
before he'd almost even started. So who knows what, if he would have been able to do exactly the movie he wanted to do, how it would have turned out. And for the record, we watched just the theatrical version of this. There's a director's cut, but it was like $15 or $20 to watch it. I thought, oh, the heck with that. And it's another 30 minutes or something. And I've heard pro and con. Some people say the director's cut is better. Some say the standard theatrical one is better. But with this movie, it's just, and I've talked before about the, my kind of rule of franchises is where they get funny as they go along. This one's not funny at all. This is a really dour movie, and everything is gray. The prison place that they're at is gray. They all dress like the in the Matrix when they're in the real world and they have the tattered gray clothing and they eat gruel and everything. It's all like that. There's no color in anything. Everything is either it's gray or there's, and it, this kind of went on to be sort of Fincher's look in those other movies that I mentioned where, it's kind of sepia tone a lot of the time almost, or, like kind of a yellowish color. But I just kept thinking, even in real life prisons, there's some color here and there. People put posters up in their cells and stuff. You know what I mean? I don't know. That was definitely a stylistic thing, but it's just, you know what I mean? It was just so dour. And then you have, and nothing against them, as you said, a lot of these British actors went on to big careers, but you have Sigourney Weaver, who is American, or I think maybe she's actually Canadian, but and Charles S. Dutton, who's American, and then the rest of it, it's a British film essentially, and I can't imagine, with, not that Americans hate British actors or anything, but I can't imagine that connected with audiences a whole lot in 1992. But it's a lot of basically just these guys yelling at each other. That's a lot of the movie. And you talked about the guy in the suit with the alien, but you also have a lot of, this is probably the first in the series where they used any CG, and it's a lot of not ready for prime time CG. No. I mean, it's pretty laughable.
It's either a dude in a suit that doesn't look like the fully detailed xenomorph suit. It looks like he's got a xenomorph head and he's basically wearing a Mr. Goodbody unitard.
Yeah,
it's not great, or it's 100% early stage CG, and you just go, whoa, that looks like garbage.
Yeah, and the alien design from H.R. Giger or Geiger, I've never known how to say it, is such a, that guy was such a sort of a mad genius, and easily one of the greatest creature designs in the history of film. And in those first two movies, the xenomorph is horrifying, and in this you just kind of laugh at it. Right. When you see it scurrying around in the CG, and I just kept thinking, it's almost sort of like, at this point, the xenomorph is almost sort of like, the villain from a slasher movie, like a Jason Voorhees or a Michael Myers or something, where it's like, okay, we now have a third movie where it's just people being killed by the xenomorph. And it's not even like, if they'd been a little bit creative with what the xenomorph is doing, but a lot of times it's off screen when it kills somebody,
and we don't care about the victims.
You don't care about them.
Prisoners, you can tell in the script that there's supposed to be some delineation of this guy versus that guy, but it all bleeds together. You don't care about any of them. You don't get attached to any of them.
And that's why I think, I was thinking a lot watching this. You have, all of these studios now, they want to make everything into a giant franchise. And I forget what I read the other day. I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but some movie that is kind of like a standalone thing, but the studio is talking about making a whole universe with it. Well, I feel like Prometheus, I feel like Ridley Scott was very smart in that he went in a different direction and didn't just make another movie that was just about the xenomorphs, and it made a lot of money. It made twice as much as so I think prior to that, the most that any had made was like under 200 million.
Yeah.
And Prometheus, now obviously this is a long time later, so just for inflation and everything, but Prometheus made over $400 million, which in the 90s or the 80s would have been viewed as a hit, but today, when everything has to make $1 billion, it was viewed as a disappointment. And there were a lot of, they felt like a lot of the audience was just like, well, we just wanted to see the xenomorph killing people again. And so they kind of split the difference with the next one, with Alien Covenant, where they tried to have it be partly in the foot of the Prometheus world, but also, hey, let's have xenomorphs in it again. And to me, this is a franchise where you really can kind of do that universe and expand out. But apparently the audience this is what they want, is just the xenomorph killing people.
I think the problem with this franchise, if you can call it a problem, is that Alien is such a singular vision, and it really is. I mean, it's a wonderful horror movie. It's the monster in the dark, and he does all kinds of things to twist it. They land on the planet. There's a mysterious alien ship. There are those weird eggs. The thing comes out of the facehugger, comes out of the egg and wraps around. I mean, all of this is horrifying body horror stuff. He wakes, it lets go of him, right? And he's hungry as hell, and he's eating all this stuff, and then the alien bursts out of his chest and begins picking off the crew one at a time, right? That's it. That's the movie. It's absolutely terrifying. You never really get to see the whole creation of it. And Giger was making all of these designs before. Like Ridley Scott was like something like what this artist is doing, Yeah. So there's so much specificity in it, and it isn't really about the monster, right? The monster is just killing. It's just a predator. We don't know anything about its history or its lore, or the motivations are basically it's born and it is killing these lower life forms, right? It's on a ship that it doesn't control. I mean, I'm not apologizing for the xenomorph, but that's all they do.
Yeah.
They kill. They don't, like, if you left a bunch of them alone, they wouldn't develop art and science and build a society, right? They're just
probably not.
They're just animals that kill other life forms. That's all they do. And so there's not a lot so it's smart to go, if you have to make a sequel to that, the idea of like, okay, now we're going and there's an infestation, there's a bunch of them. One cockroach is scary. 1,000 cockroaches is scarier in a different way. The third one, we'll go back to form. It's a closed box. There's one thing, right? We're going to put some twists on it, but we've seen that movie.
Yeah.
Right? You already made that movie. So they keep trying to and people like that movie. They keep trying to okay, now we're going to have it fight the Predator. Now we're going to, those things aren't what made Alien such a great movie. So I love that Ridley Scott went and made Prometheus and explored, because he had this universe in his mind, right? And he got into David and the artificial intelligence, which I always thought was one of the most interesting parts of the original Alien movie.
Yeah.
Was this artificial crew member who is working for the corporation that owns it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the history of David and of Wayland, those are my favorite parts of those films.
Yeah.
But, you know, as much as I admire Ridley Scott and his absolute genius, one of the things that nobody finds a little frustrating about Ridley Scott is he knows what side his bread is buttered on. So he has said this explicitly, you know, the studio is going to pay me a large amount of money to do the thing that I love to do. And so if they say more mustard, I'm going to give them more mustard. That's my job, right?
Yeah.
And I think I get it, but the studios are not artists. The studios are business people. They want to squeeze as much money out of a thing as they possibly can. And you don't get seminal, groundbreaking films like Blade Runner, like Alien, if you let the studio make too many decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think in the case of Star Wars, it's a good thing that the studio was like, okay, George, rein it. You have to rein it in a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because George Lucas has some terrible instincts in terms of storytelling. So you do need, I mean, I think it can be good if the studio is a set of rails. But if you let them in, they're like, okay, she needs to have bigger tits, and we need a kid in here, and there needs to be
focus group everything.
Yeah, there needs to be, exactly. You start to be like, all of this specificity gets diluted down to this kind of general crowd-pleasing baloney.
We've talked about the Netflix movies where they feel like
that doesn't make
they're
anybody
written by
happy.
an AI, you know.
Right. Yeah, people are watching it, but nobody's really enjoying it. I mean, this is forgettable. And the studio may say, I don't care. I mean, as long as people are watching it, that's our goal. But that's not how to make art.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is, and a couple of points there. So one, to your Indiana Jones point, that, you know, with Last Crusade, they went back to kind of the original formula. The big difference there is that, like you're saying, in the Indiana Jones movies, you have interesting characters. You know, you don't just have obviously it's Indiana Jones, but you have some other interesting characters in there. Basically, with this Alien franchise, I would argue until you get to Prometheus and you have David, you've got Ripley, basically. Not that, you know, but and I don't know how many times I've seen the original Alien, several times, and I can't tell you most of the other character names, you know.
Right.
So,
I think
you're just rehashing that thing.
I think Wayland is interesting.
Yeah.
But you've got Ripley, and the robots are interesting. The robots are interesting. I was going to say until you get to David, it's just Ripley and everybody else is cannon fodder. I mean, everybody else is just there to get eaten. And the robots are interesting. Ian Holm is interesting, and what's his name? Can't believe I'm not remembering his name.
I'll look it up here.
He's in this. Lance Henriksen.
Lance Henriksen
is in this one too. And he's interesting also, but I don't think until you get Fassbender's David, you get inside the head of the robot.
Mm-hmm.
And if David is kind of a unique, and remember the Prometheus one is a prequel to this, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, David is what makes David so terrible is that Wayland created him to be too human. Subsequent robots are sort of stepped on, right? Like in Blade Runner, the subsequent replicants are like, well, we don't run because we do what we're told, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The earlier models are too human, and they stepped it down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it's a Ripley series. The Alien is interesting. It's very one note, and then you have Ripley, and then you've got the synthetics that have something with which they're struggling, and everybody else is just dog food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we decide to do any more of them, so there's Resurrection. I mean, They literally bring her back from the dead.
Yeah.
Right? She
Yeah.
dies in this one. The end. Oh, but it's not.
Yeah. And I've seen that one a long time, 20 years ago, and it's not great either. But again, and it made more money than it's kind of interesting that sort of these ones that most people agree are not very good, they still did well. So now upcoming, there's going to be a series, and I don't think there's been really anything revealed about it other than I think it's another, a different time. So it doesn't have anything to do with Ripley, as far as I know. But it's by the guy. Have you watched any of the Fargo show? Have you watched any of those?
No, and I've been told to many times.
I watched the first season, which is really good, and then it's I think there's 3 seasons, and each one is completely is a completely new story, completely different story. So the showrunner for that is who is doing it, and that guy is really talented. So it could be interesting, assuming he's given kind of free reign to do. I kind of highly doubt that it's going to be 8 or 10 hours of the alien, the xenomorph killing people, So it could be interesting, but it depends on how they go with it. If they think that audiences that's all audience want to see is the xenomorph killing people, then that could be kind of dull. But
it's how you go with it. I think in what's the Covenant? Is that the sequel to? So Prometheus, we get a dabble, and even in this one, we get a tiny dabble in it. That somehow the facehugger comes out of the egg, and it looks pretty much like it looks. But the second stage of the xenomorph that develops in the host is somehow affected by the host. So the DNA of the host affects the final version of this thing. In Prometheus, the big tentacled thing that attacks the first engineer is unlike anything that the xenomorphs we see other times. And then the xenomorph, they're all different shapes and sizes. It's like that sort of black goo is a genetic cocktail that perverses whatever genetic material it gets from its host. And we see that in Covenant, that there's a sort of David's workshop as all of these, he's tested it on bugs and all different life forms and the resultant perversions that the black goo causes until he feels like he has sort of quote unquote perfected the final version of it, which is the xenomorph. I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting to play with. Well, what is this stuff and why did they create it and how does it work? And to what end? I think that's where the future of this franchise lives, is now that we've cracked it open, it's this sort of exploration of the origin story of this whole. I saw something online, it's like, who created the creators? And on and on and on and on. And I think that if you were just going to do a series where it was a xenomorph killing people on different settings, it's just...
Yeah. I can't imagine that's what it's going to be, but we'll see.
That was one of the problems I had with Stranger Things. I think that first season of Stranger Things is absolutely electrifying. And I think 2 is less so, and 3 is less so, and 4 is less so, and 5 kind of returns to the origin story of like, well, what is this upside down, and where did it come from, and how does it relate to 11, right? And I said to a friend of mine who hasn't seen any of it, he's like, is it worth watching? I said it's definitely worth watching. I think you should watch season 1. If you like season 1, as far as I'm concerned, you can go ahead and skip to season 5. And there'll be a recap.
I actually did that. I wasn't the friend that you're talking about.
There'll be a recap of 2, 3, 4. It's like, oh, this one it's smoke, and this one it doesn't matter. They're just kind of, they're feeling around in the dark. And it doesn't really go anywhere that you care about until season 5 again. I mean, not that there aren't moments. There's some highlights, but
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. They just seem so desperate to reboot existing properties. I'm like, spend your time and energy
can't have
finding
enough
the
of
new
a good thing.
storytellers, right? Find the new Ridley Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Take a leap on these new filmmakers, man. And
We have the whole Writers Guild strike is still going on. I don't know how many weeks into this they are.
right, they don't even
You
want
know.
to pay the people that write the content. It's like,
Yeah. So, I mean, they're going to really, I'd say, try to, let AI write the stuff, and you're going to get, I mean, the AI is getting, on the one hand, I'm not totally against the AI. I'm using it in my work a lot, but
it's here and it's happening.
it's here and it's happening. But if you just want, which the studios seem to be fine with, more stuff like, we criticize the Netflix films. If you just want more formulaic stuff, then you don't need writers, I guess.
But audiences don't ultimately want that. I mean, that might be what sells a summer blockbuster. People just want to go turn their brain off and watch whatever, but it's not art, guys.
No.
And they know it.
Yeah.
I know it's a business to the studio.
And I hate that idea of turning your brain off, because when you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, it's like they're saying when all is said and done, we're both excited for it, so hopefully it's good. But this new Indiana Jones movie, all told, is going to be like $300 million they have in it. So why do you skimp on the writing? There's the money to spend on good writing,
Yeah, writing is actually the
get it.
cheapest part of it.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do we want to wrap up Alien and then talk about other stuff? Because
Sure.
It's I don't know. Would you recommend it or?
I mean, I didn't crave turning it off. It's okay. I think if you're a diehard of the thing and you want to, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, thumb sideways, I guess. I didn't feel so negatively about it that I'm like, don't watch this, people. But it's hard for me to be like, oh, you guys should check it out. Well, it's sort of forgettable.
Yeah. As I said, it's the only one that I had never watched, so I was able to. I always wanted to see it. Even though I'd heard it's bad. It's not a terrible. It's not like it's
No.
inept or anything like that. But it's just not particularly exciting, and like I say, it's just so dreary and drab, and not like I want bright neon colors, in this, but I don't know. But and I would say if you're somebody who is not that familiar with, I don't really know what the ages are of people listening to our show or watching it, but if you're younger and you weren't around in the 80s and the 70s, just watch the first two.
Right.
You watch the first two and then skip to Prometheus. I mean, the first two, Prometheus is somewhat controversial, but the first two are undeniable classics, And to see, if you only know James Cameron from Avatar or maybe, Titanic, he did some other cool sci-fi stuff,
Terminator.
So, yeah, so I'd say skip it, and unless it's, like I say, unless you want to just be a completist, like I wanted to be with this. But let's segue into Avatar then.
Yeah. So what's interesting so far, and I'm only about 20 minutes in, is it's very it's interesting. They start speaking Na'vi, and there's subtitles, and the subtitles are in papyrus, the font. I just can't get my head around. And he's like, Sam Worthington is now the chief of the clan or whatever. He's the Muknatal, whatever. He flew the big thing. And he married what's-her-face, and they've got a bunch of kids now. So it's a family drama. And he's like this military dad, and they all call him Sir. and they all have a variety. It switches to English. Like there's this thing where you goes rip, and now they're just talking English, but they're talking like middle America English. Like if you had the sound off and you heard the scene where Sam Worthington is berating one of his kids for taking unnecessary risks. He's like, "You're grounded. No flying for a month." And it's, "Yes, sir." It's just weird. It's jarring. And it's appealing to this sort of middle American audience, but everybody's blue and CGI. and so all the bad guys from the original thing are now coming back to Pandora. They're dead, but they made an upload of their brains, and so now they're in these genetically engineered Na'vi. They're not avatars, they're full-on Na'vi bodies that they have their consciousnesses uploaded into. And they're coming back to get Jake Sully. And it's just a revenge piece. Now, this is like a 3-hour movie. I'm not watching it in the full 3D because I don't have that at home. And there were some criticisms of the first one, of the sort of noble savage and the kind of Native American two-dimensional stuff they were doing with the first one. And I don't buck against any of those criticisms. But so far, this one feels remarkably thin, dialogue-wise and sort of choice-wise for James Cameron. And the thought that I had last night before I turned it off because I was tired, I started watching it late, was, this is what you've been working on for 20 years? Right? I mean, It's not that the performances are bad. Everybody's showing up and doing their performances. I just thought it's like it could be around the dinner table in Iowa. And I'm just like, what? They do some sort of, I'm not going to say I'm offended by it, but they do some borderline gestures to like native stuff and ceremonies. It all feels very thin. It all feels very kind of, gestural, like frosting. And I just was like, we talked about working on the script. I'm like, this is 20 years of your effort?
Well,
and
the first one.
I am finished.
The first one, and I watched it in the theater, and I don't think I ever watched it again after that. But that one was kind of the same way, where it wasn't, and you could, I don't know if this is fair to say or not. I was going to say maybe the weakest aspect of Cameron is his screenwriting. Visually, he's a brilliant director, and just the stuff that he does with technology that he's always done, going back to Terminator 2, and all of that. But that first one, I think kind of the genius of it and why it did so well, and I don't know if he was cognizant of this at the time or not, or betting on this or whatever, but, you had that colonizers versus the indigenous people story, which is universal. That's happened all around the world. And I think that's partly why it did so well, is it made money everywhere, because every society can relate to that. And I almost wonder, I kind of doubt it, but maybe this is just how it worked out. But that simplicity, that's a criticism right now as to why we're getting such bad movies, is movies aren't necessarily made for us anymore. They're made for China, and they're made for these other big markets. And so that simplicity plays well for making it a worldwide hit. You know what I mean?
I hadn't thought of that.
Like I say, I don't know if Cameron is sitting down and saying, "Hey, I got to make this really simple so people all around the world can understand it." I don't know, but
I hadn't.
But
thought
I
of
think
that.
that's
That
definitely
makes some
what
sense. Yeah,
that's why the first one, partly why the first one did so well, just because it was a. I'm not saying it was like it did well because it was a bad script, but it did well because it was a universal story that everybody could understand. And if that's one of the reasons why we're not getting comedies like we did when we were kids, because comedies don't work globally because different cultures don't necessarily get the jokes, you know?
Yeah. That's a little
like I
depressing to
say,
me.
I think Cameron, you know, I'm not going out on a limb to say that he thinks very highly of himself. So I don't know that he would just be like, well, I'm purposely going to write a mediocre script just so people get it, you know, but maybe that's just how it's worked out. I don't know.
That makes a ton of sense when you say that. I hadn't thought of that before, because I think if anything, he's trying to top his own box office smashing, record smashing. Like, the guy has broken his own record time and time again, and I think the way to do that now is to reach global audiences, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a U.S. audience anymore. And, yeah, I think it needs to appeal to the widest base, big family. He's a father that maybe cares too much, you know, caring for his kids. Again, this is just the first 25 minutes, you know, get in the way of his leadership because he cares so much about his kids. And that translates to any culture.
Now, this is the thing that I wondered about is, you know, seeing it at home, does it, because I'm sure if you saw this on a big screen in 3D and all that, it probably is pretty amazing. But watching it at home, is the CGI convincing or does it look like a cartoon?
Looks like a cartoon.
Okay.
I think.
And that's where I don't know if I'm going to be able to sit and watch 3 hours of that and be into it.
I mean, I turned
you know?
it off. I'm going to go back to it because it's on HBO, but I think these movies are designed to see in IMAX and 3D. I think that's I saw the first one in IMAX and 3D and it blew me away.
Yeah.
And I could see the criticisms. I get it. I mean, it wasn't, you know, Hamlet.
But it was technically
the visual
amazing.
effects were just absolutely transportational. And I think with this one, they go into the water, and it's supposedly, the reviews I read were like, in that aspect, he's outdone himself again. So until it comes back to the theater and I can put on the goggles or whatever and go see it, I'm not going to get that experience. But
yeah. And now that's where I would praise Cameron is you know, he obviously wants people to have the theatrical experience. You know, he's not making movies for you to watch on your phone or your tablet or whatever.
Right.
And I wish in another cynical way, I really feel like, you know, I feel like every episode I bash Marvel or whatever, but you very much get the feeling with the CG and so much of the other films that we're getting now that are just like, it looks good enough. Who cares? It's only got to be, you know, we don't care if anybody is going to like this in 30 years. You know, we just want to make money right now.
Right.
And I think if even though, you know, you're saying it looks like a cartoon at home, I think if all of these films, they were putting the kind of work in that Cameron is visually, all these big budget movies would be a lot better, in my opinion.
Yeah. Perhaps
if they're not going to put work into the script, they can at least look good, you know? Right. So, yeah. I wanted to tell you about something. Did you want to say anything more about Avatar?
Nope.
Or? Yeah, I mean, that was what I would have guessed was that, I don't know, because it popped up. I saw, you know, that it's available to watch at home, and I thought, maybe, but I don't know. I've been watching, and it's a little bit funny. I've never watched The Boys, the series The Boys, but they've now done an animated spinoff.
Oh, really?
And it's great.
But you haven't seen the live action.
I haven't seen the live action, and I know the gist of it, you know. But so they have
you'd
done
like the live action, actually.
Yeah, I probably would. This is the thing that the animated thing is great. They're all like 15 minutes long each episode, you know, and it's an anthology where they're just individual stories, and they've gotten different filmmakers and their different styles. So they got, I mean, he's you know, kind of damaged goods right now, but Justin Roiland or whatever his name is from
Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty. He did an episode. So it's it's written by him, and it's that Rick and Morty style. I mean, you look at it and you're like, oh, it's the Rick and Morty guy. And then Aquafina did one that's just straight up like real cutesy anime style, but it's people being beheaded and stuff, And then there's another one that's a more I don't know what you would call it, but just a more sort of realistic animation style, but they're all it's all hand drawn, or it looks like hand drawn. None of them have been CG, and they're really good. I mean, it's the same thing where it's it's super gory and kind of gross and all that, but it's really good, and it's just like eight or 10 15-minute episodes. I've watched 3 or 4 of them, and they were all really good.
Is that why you haven't waded into the live action? It just feels like too much commitment.
Yeah, that's how I am with just shows in general. I don't know if I told you or not, but I started. It was weird. No one has talked about. I haven't heard any discussion or seen anything online about the 3rd season of The Mandalorian. I don't know why it kind of just. I don't know if there's just too much stuff or what, but I didn't hear. And I've talked to a couple of friends who were into the first couple of seasons who have said, oh, it started? And I'm like, yeah, it's already done. But I started watching it. I've only watched 3 episodes, and it's basically just him and Baby Yoda just running around doing it, which is fine. I don't need a giant, which I know it's going to get bigger as the season goes on. But right now it's just Baby Yoda being cute and Mando going on missions with him, and it's great. I don't need more than that, but I have a hard time with series in general, because even stuff that happened with Stranger Things. I loved the first season. I watched 2 or 3 episodes of the second season and just never got back to it, and then I skipped to the last season.
Yeah.
So things that are an hour long or 45 minutes long, and there's 8 or 10 of them, I'd rather just watch a 2-hour movie, So, but this, I mean, if you like The Boys, you should watch this animated
All
thing.
right,
It's
I'll
fun,
check it out.
So yeah, but and they've got a lot of big stars doing the voiceovers and everything. So, but have you watched anything else other than?
I've started watching
Avatar?
Barry, and I've started watching Somebody Somewhere, and both of those series I'm enjoying enormously.
I only watched the first season of Barry, but I liked it. I heard a. Have you ever listened to the Smartless podcast?
No.
So it is Will. Is it Will Forte? And Jason Bateman, and then I can't think of what the guy's name is, but he was on Will and Grace. It's the 3 of them together, and it's kind of funny because it's like our little podcast has gotten to be this big deal, and it's like you're 3 big stars that just interview your friends, But they had Bill Hader on there, and it was super interesting. I don't know if you know any of his background, but it's not like he was a comedian. I mean, this is how it worked out. That he was a comedian and then went on to be a director. But he went to Hollywood to be a director. That was his goal. And he kind of fell into SNL. He was doing, I think he was doing Second City in L.A., and somebody there knew Lorne Michaels and was like, oh, you're really funny. We could probably get you an audition with him. And he was like, oh, that'd be cool. And he did it. And he said for like the first 4 seasons, he had horrible stage fright and was just terrified all the time. But he said what he was really interested in, he would go and hang out with the Lonely Island guys, and they would do those digital shorts, and he would just go and watch what they did because he wanted to direct. And they would put him. He's super funny, so they would put him in some of that stuff. But his. It wasn't like the actor who was like, oh, I've decided I'm going to direct now. That's what he's always wanted to do.
Interesting.
So, yeah. But that's a guy where it's just like he has all the talent. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's super funny, and he could, he writes and directs that show. I don't think he writes it entirely, but and he did when he was pitching it, in the pitch meeting with HBO, they were like, well, who's going to direct it? And he was like, well, I can direct it. And he'd never directed anything before, basically. And they were like, nah, and they got somebody, his agent or somebody talked him into it. But that's pretty interesting that, and it's a good show.
It is a good show. It's interesting because it's very funny, but it's also very dark.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I'm enjoying it. I just finished the first season and I've started the second season. And excited to see where it goes.
You would like Fargo too.
I've heard that from many, many people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the Coen brothers, and it feels very different from the Coen brothers, but it's that same kind of tone where there's humor in it, but it's also really dark.
But without that movie, the series wouldn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the guy just kind of created his own world, spun off of that. So,
well, we are at time, my friend. Why don't we call it? Do you have a sense of what you want to do next time?
I don't have any. I think we might have to just talk about that off mic because I don't have anything.
All right, baby.
Specific. I don't know if there's anything. There's stuff coming up. Like I still. I had dinner with my sister on Friday, and she's still. She really wants to see Guardians of the Galaxy, which I still haven't seen, and so we might go and see that at some point. I really want to see the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, whatever the title of it is, because that first one was fantastic, and people are saying this is like an Empire Strikes Back kind of a thing, where it's even better than the original.
Wow.
Where some people are saying like it's one of the best animated movies ever made. So which is pretty high praise. But that first one was great. So
high praise indeed.
And then we've got Indiana Jones coming up, but for next week, I don't know.
Well, we'll figure it out, folks.
We will.
Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That is our handle. We're on the socials. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. All of the good things that we like to have you do. We're going to figure out what we're going to talk about next time offline, but come back and be surprised by our pick.
Sometimes we would like to surprise people.
Sometimes we do. Thanks for joining us, whether you're on YouTube or listening to us on your favorite podcast app. We have been doing this for almost 3 years now.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah. I love it.
So I guess unless you have anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
We will talk to you next week, baby.